Hello everyone, and welcome to After Alexander, Episode 51, The Fall of Antioch. The Third Syrian War is in full swing, and we're going to see it continue to go very badly for Seleucus II. As you might have gathered from the title, it's downhill from here. Expect territory to fall, traitors to pop up, and the capitulation of Antioch itself. Fun times lie ahead for Seleucus II. Let's start this episode by dealing with the issue in the title. Yes, Antioch itself does fall. As we said last time, Ptolemy III made his way towards Antioch from Seleucia. Now, Antioch had a fairly big army, and all the governors appeared to have fled to within the city. The mood within the city initially was to put up a fight. However, their morale fell away at the sight of the Ptolemaic attackers. I'm not sure what this means exactly, but maybe the size of Ptolemy's force made them think that they were outmatched, given their initially bellicose mood. Therefore, just as Seleucia had done, Antioch opened her gates to Ptolemy III. Ptolemy was met by a procession of notables, young men, and people from Antioch, and the population was enthusiastic. The city of Antioch, capital of the empire, is in Egyptian hands. We now turn to another setback for our royal protagonist, the fall of Ephesus. The Seleukid royal family was not there at the time, but there was a governor in charge called Sophron. He was summoned to court as Laodike was unhappy with him for some unspecified reason. Whatever it was, it must have been pretty serious, as she'd made up her mind to dispose of him. You may imagine her in mafia-style glasses if it sets the mood. At this juncture, we need to turn our attention to a member of the royal court called Danae, who was the daughter of a courtier called the Ontion. Danae was stuck to Laodike I like glue, but she was also having a relationship with Sophron. When Sophron was brought before the queen, Danae was sat beside her, and, during the course of the conversation the two were having, she guessed what Laodike's intentions were. She made some sort of motion to Sophron, who guessed what was happening as well. Bevan mentions that Laodike asked something of Sophron, although not saying what it was in the process, and the governor asked for 2 days' grace. Laodike then granted this to him. When night fell, Sophron predictably ran away to Ephesus. Danae was dragged in front of the vengeful queen, who had presumably figured out her courtier's conflict of interest, but she said nothing when questioned. She was accordingly dragged away and flung from somewhere high. That deals with Danae, but what of Sophron and indeed of Ephesus? Well, when the governor made it to the city, he realised he wouldn't be safe if Laodike was still overlord of Ephesus. Likely as not, Sophron was the man who asked the Ptolemies to enter the city. Eventually, Egyptian soldiers were housed in Ephesus, and our turncoat friend Sophron shows up leading a navy for Egypt. A text found in coastal Eritrea mentions that Ptolemy moved across the Euphrates River and managed to control Babylonia, Susania, Media, Persis, Babylon, and maybe as far as Bactria within the Seleukid domains. However, our modern source Grainger calls this pro-Ptolemaic messaging. Grainger says Ptolemy III could have gotten all the way to Babylon, and apparently there is cuneiform evidence to support this. However, this is a couple of weeks' travel from the Syrian lands. This would have separated him from his Egyptian base of support and leave his forces in Syria open to retribution by Seleucus II. Ptolemy stayed in Syria as the winter set in, and 246 became 245 BCE. For the first time in what feels like forever on this show, we've actually moved from one year into another. However, Ptolemy wasn't sure what to do with his new territories yet. He would have known that there was going to be a reprisal when the thaw came. His army was likely as not spread out, and the Syrian populace was no longer behind him, which from what I know would make sense given that he no longer has a sister/nephew to back, and he's fast becoming just another conqueror. Ptolemy must have thought about bringing Cilicia and Syria into his empire. After all, they had natural borders protecting them, with the only downside being their resentful populace. He was snapped out of his presumed indecision by problems back home. Most likely, this refers to the poor in Egypt rising up because of the high taxes. In point of fact, Ptolemy left the area. It's been pointed out that, provided he didn't just want a convenient excuse to turn around and go home, This shows how bad these uprisings must have been. Ptolemy III left Xanthippos in charge of Mesopotamia and a man called Antiochus in Cilicia, with the aim of bringing Syria into the Ptolemaic Empire. I find myself flippantly wondering if he wanted to make the transition easier by employing a governor with the decidedly Seleukid name of Antiochus, or if that name was just more common than we might realise. Incidentally, the name Xanthippus turns up again in the leader of Ptolemy's armies, who may have been a man called Xanthippus of Carthage. Xanthippus was a Spartan general for hire who beat the Romans in 255 BCE at Baghradi/Tunis during the First Punic War. His Wikipedia, supported by a source by John Lazenby, confirms that it is the same man who shows up 10 years later as a Ptolemaic governor. Anyway, Ptolemy stole everything that wasn't nailed down from the towns, not forgetting elephants and battleships. He crowed about his theft to the Egyptian people, and the claim of an influx of money must have calmed down a simmering Egypt. The loot was, however, likely shared among the court and the army without trickling down. Some troops stayed in northern Syria, but the expectation wasn't a long-term defense of the region. Apparently, Xanthippos' position was not to last forever, and the idea was not to annex the region. Given that we've just mentioned that Syria was meant to be brought into the Ptolemaic Empire, perhaps this only refers to North Syria, but I'm slightly unsure as to what his fate was going to be at this point. With that said, we've spent a lot of time in this episode talking about Ptolemy III and to some extent Laodike I. However, what about the man who's supposed to be running the empire? What about Seleucus II? Well, Seleucus had already moved on, even though Ptolemy wouldn't have known it yet. According to Justinus, Seleucus II had gathered a fleet to put down the rebellion once Ptolemy had set off. However, everything was destroyed in a storm, which Justinus says seems like divine punishment for his murder of Berenike and Antiochus. Grey hair is an indicator of stress in life, and I can almost feel Seleucus' hair turning grey as he watches his fleet sink beneath the waves. Nothing was left except for Seleucus II himself and a few followers. Some cities switched back over to Seleucus, feeling that the storm had been the gods dishing out justice, which was now served. You have to wonder if Seleucus thought he didn't want pity support, or if he was just grateful for all the help he could get. I'm probably thinking too much about a Seleukid psychological state, but still. Justinus' book 27 isn't much help to us from here on in, as he goes on to cover events once Seleucus actually gets to Ptolemy, and we're not quite there yet. Next time, we'll continue the story of the Third Syrian War as it unfolds. Until then, thank you all for listening. Feel free to get in touch with the show's email address for any questions, comments, or topic suggestions for future Tangent episodes. Until next time, have a great week, everyone.